Welcome to the Actual Fluency podcast. Each week you'll find inspirational, motivational interviews with some of the world's best language learners, industry experts, all trying to help you to learn foreign languages better, faster, and more efficiently. And here we go. If you're looking for a language teacher to enhance your language learning, then I highly recommend italki. Italki is the world's biggest tutoring platform, and you can find thousands of teachers and tutors at very reasonable prices. Get a free lesson after completing your first lesson by going to languageteacher.co. Hello guys, welcome to episode 146 of the Actual Fluency podcast. Today I'm joined by Shannon Kennedy, who runs the site Eurolinguist, and she also is responsible for the upcoming Women in Language conference, which we get into in this episode. Shannon has been on the show before, back in episode 93, so if you're interested in what it means to be a shy language learner and want to get some tools on how you can be getting more results even if you are introverted and or shy, then check out episode 93 for that. In this episode, we chat about Shannon's current projects like the Add One Challenge, Women in Language Conference, and a few other projects she has going on. So be sure to tune in to the whole episode and have fun. Shannon, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to have you back. It's been, as we just discussed before the recording, almost 3 years since you were on in episode 93.
Yeah.
So for the people who haven't heard about you and the people who did hear about you, do you want to give a little introduction to yourself, what you've been up to, and especially the last 3 years since we heard from you?
Sure. So my name is Shannon Kennedy. I run a website called Eurolinguist. That's with an E at the end. And that's kind of how I got started in languages. I started learning them at university, and that site was kind of what I started to document that process and kind of share some of what I was doing. And it's really evolved from there. Since that point, I started working as a language encourager at Fluent in 3 months. So I write a lot for them. I run the Add One Challenge, which is run by Fluent in 3 months. So I'm the head coach or community manager for the Add One Challenge. I also am the resident polyglot and language expert at Drops, which is a vocabulary learning app that's available for both Android and iOS devices. And in the last 3 years, I've studied quite a few more languages. I didn't really intend to. I kind of planned to stop after Korean, but then Japanese happened, and then Spanish happened, and then Hungarian happened, and then Hindi's happening, and I'm gonna pick German back up. So I haven't started that yet, but I'm gonna start that next week with the next Add One Challenge. So I've been keeping pretty busy.
Yeah, as usual, and you're also a musician, so you're releasing a new album coming up
Yeah.
as well. So people into jazz, they should definitely look you up as well.
Thank you.
So I guess we should just quickly to tell people what the Add One Challenge is. I'm not sure if everyone knows, so could you just let us know in 2 sentences what it is?
Sure. So the Add One Challenge is a 90-day challenge that helps you get to a 15-minute conversation in the language that you're learning in that 90 days. It's one sentence.
Yeah, so it's like it's a group of learners who come together to create this like a positive environment where you're more encouraged and motivated to do that regular daily studying or work, whatever that kind of studying might be.
Yeah. So basically, it's, as you said, it's a community. So you're learning alongside anywhere from 100 to 200 other learners. So there's a lot of motivation in that. You have a daily check-in so that you can keep accountable to your studies. You have a series of assignments, of videos, of mini challenges that you do as a part of that curriculum that help you get to that 15-minute conversation.
Right. Yeah, I did one a few years back, and it was a really positive experience. So I highly recommend it for people who are struggling a little bit. Maybe they don't have a lot of language learning friends in their immediate community or on their Facebook friends. Then if you join this kind of community, you definitely feel kind of pushed a lot to do some work and get amazing results. Like some of the videos I've seen from Add One where people could barely say a word in the beginning, and then after 3 months they actually have this kind of conversation, I think is quite powerful.
Yeah, it's really great. And I can tell you from personal experience because I try to do almost every challenge that I run, like to participate in it. And it's really helped me immensely with the different languages. I mean, I didn't know any Japanese, I didn't know any Hungarian before studying them with the Add One Challenge. And I was able to get to those 15-minute conversations every single time. So if you do the work and you participate in the challenge, it's really, really effective.
Yeah. And then something else coming up for the second time, which I think is the main topic of this episode because it's very timely. And last time we talked about introverted language learning, which I think is a very interesting topic. But I think we kind of went over what was in it there, and if people are introverted and want to learn languages better, then definitely go back and listen to episode 93. There's really some good content there. But today we wanted to talk to you about the upcoming online conference, Women in Language. Do you want to just tell people what what that is, basically?
Of course. So, Women in Language is an online event that is hosted by Lindsay Williams of Lindsay Does Languages, Kirsten Cable of fluentlanguage.co.uk, and myself. We started the event a year ago. We had the first event around this time last year, and it was just amazing. We had more than 25 speakers, we had several panels, we had chats during the conference that were just on fire. It was an amazing community building experience. It was a great chance for us to give speakers who don't normally go to the polyglot events or who don't normally present at the polyglot events the chance to present. And so we're doing it again this year. It's going to be March 7th to 10th, so that's a Thursday through Sunday. We have more than 30 speakers this year. We have 2 panels. We also have a series, we have an hour allotted for lightning talks as well, so we'll have several speakers speaking during that time. There's going to be a chat again. We offer a workbook so you can take notes during each of the talks. Because it's an online event, we're able to provide the recordings of the talks. So if you can't attend them live, you'll be able to watch them later with the purchase of your ticket. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We have other fun activities going on during the event. We also have a raffle, which you don't have to do anything extra to qualify for. When you buy a ticket, you're entered into the raffle, and we have, I think, more than $1,500 in prizes available that we're going to split into 3 groups. It's a great event, and there's just so many great people involved.
Fantastic. Before we get into the sort of the elephant in the room topic in a second, I just want to maybe talk a little bit about language events in general. Like, I think a big, I think language events for me changed my life completely, and that's, maybe it sounds a little bit exaggerated, but when I went to the first polyglot gathering in Berlin in 2014, I didn't know what to expect at all. And I wasn't someone who had been studying languages for years before. I'd done it when I was younger, much younger in school. And then I sort of gave up on it in my teens and early 20s. And I've kind of refound it through this community. And I went to the gathering, and just a mind blowing experience of positivity and amazement that some people can just, there were people there who spoke 15 languages and just switched between them. Um, have you had similar experiences with language events, either offline or online? And can you share a little bit about your own experience?
Absolutely. So first, I want to start by saying that, like, when we're talking about language learning, we're mostly talking about independent language learning. And the thing about independent language learning is that it feels really, really lonely
Hmm.
because basically you're by yourself in your room, at your desk, or wherever it is that you enjoy studying, working on this language. Maybe you have an exchange partner, or maybe you have a tutor that you chat with every so often. But for the most part, 90% of the work you're doing is by yourself. And a lot of the time when you're doing this, the people immediately around you, like your friends and family, they probably aren't into language learning in the same way that you are. And so you can feel a little bit isolated, and you feel like no one really understands why you enjoy doing this, why you
Hmm.
spend so much time doing this. So when you go to an event like this, suddenly you're meeting people who share that same interest, who share that same passion, who get you, who understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And there's no judgment there. There's just respect and appreciation and, this mutual understanding with this group of people. And so it's suddenly like, I don't know, I maybe felt like it kind of validated what I was doing, because for the most part, even though you kind of, there's Facebook groups and you chat with people a little bit, like you and I know each other, but when you go and you meet everyone face to face, you're putting face to the names that you're actually engaging with people, in like face to face, and it's incredibly rewarding, it's incredibly motivating, and you're right, it is life changing, because for the most part you do this on your own and
Yeah.
no one sees the work that you're putting in, and you're doing all of this just to be able to communicate and use these languages, and people just see the end result. It's a lot like music. So like I spend hours and hours practicing, but no one sees that part. They only see the
Mm.
part where I'm on stage performing. And so when you connect with other musicians, when you connect with other language learners, there's just this chemistry there, because, they get it. And when you're around people who get it, it's just really rewarding, and it's just an amazing experience. So these events are definitely very, very, very great to attend.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with what you just said, and it's a very positive experience. Even in if you talked about other things like sports and stuff, people see one game or they see one race, but the reason that that person won that race or that game is because of all the 5 a.m. trainings and all the gym sessions and all the coaching, everything that's led up to that, which you'd never see, of course. It just looks effortless when Bolt is running the 100 meters, or Federer is playing tennis or whatever. It looks easy, but obviously that they've practiced for hours and hours and hours away from the courts. And in language learning is very similar, I feel like. But it can also drive you mad if you don't have that social outlet. If you're just sitting at home and just buried in your books. I know for me, definitely that happened, where I kind of closed the door and I just sat inside all the time. So going to these events, and I think online events are almost the same as live events. I think definitely you can mimic 95% of the experience. Obviously, going to an actual in-person event is going to give you that last 5%, I think, but it's just not possible for most people. Like if you look at the size of the community, I don't even know, but I'm guessing we're in the six figures somewhere, maybe even bigger. And the biggest conference will hold what, 600 people. So even if everyone had the means and time to go, there's just not space. So having an online event, which is anyone can go to, is really positive as well.
Exactly. I think, both have their place. The in-person events are great if you can afford to get there, if you can take the time to go. But online events, more people can go. It tends to be much more affordable. You don't have to pay for travel at all.
Mm.
You also, because it's online, the nature of it, you can have the online recordings after. There's other elements that you can add, like workbooks and chat and things like that, that add this different level of engagement that you don't have at the in-person events, because in the in-person events you're going to different talks, you're spending time talking to people outside, and if you miss a talk, you miss a talk. Whereas with the online events, you can go back and watch the recording. You can kind of be in more than one chat room at the same time, because you just tab over to a new window.
Yeah,
There's they're just different, and they complement one another. I definitely think
definitely.
there's a space for both.
Definitely, and I like the idea of having both also, because then you have different opportunities during different times of year, where you can, if you had to go to all the conferences, right? This year it's in Japan, Canada, Bratislava. I mean, that's three continents. No matter where you live in the world, that would be obscenely expensive and inconvenient to get to all three. So the idea that you have some online events anyone can get to, I think is fantastic.
Right. And it's not just the participants, it's the speakers too. So when you have an online event, there's speakers that you can, feature that you might not be able to feature at an in-person event, because again, that speaker might not be able to get to that event. So it's, there's a lot more variety that you can have as far as participants and as far as speakers with an online event.
Yeah, definitely agree. So what kind of do you have any any examples of the kind of talks that are going to happen? Like what are the speakers going to be talking about?
Of course. So we have four different tracks that make up Women in Language. So the first is learning languages. Last year, this was split into two categories. So we had new languages and mastering languages, or starting languages and mastering languages. So we decided to combine these two into just learning languages in general this year. So that's going to be talks for learners of languages of any level who want to improve their learning strategies and to pick up new methods for learning languages. We also have living and working with languages. So these are where you're going to get tips and hear about the experiences of people who use languages for their relationships or for their work. So things like international or intercultural love, cultural differences, how to run a language-based business, volunteering, other language jobs, and other stories about relationships and languages. We also have travel with languages. So we have several speakers who are going to be talking about how they use languages to travel or how they travel to learn languages. And then we'll also have a couple introductions to other countries and their languages. And finally, we have language discoveries, which is our new category for this year, where we're going to be talking about minority languages or unusual languages, like not like the main like French, German, Spanish, Russian kind of thing. So, or little known communities and other quirky learning techniques that normally don't kind of get put out there in the spotlight.
Right. Fantastic. There's definitely a good variety there. And I always like, actually, two of the things you said I really like. I like the methods and tactics, so learning how other people do it, because I find that it inspires me to try new things and potentially find things that I really enjoy doing. And the second one was the stories. I think you said story, used the word stories. I just love how listening how people use languages in kind of unusual ways, or definitely non-standard ways, especially with travels. Like that's one of the big advantages to language learning, I find, is that even if you just learn a little bit of a language, if you go there and use it, it's really life changing for you and the person you speak it with, even if it's just a hello, because they're not used to, most countries anyway, are not used to people just learning their language, foreigners learning their language. So those are my two favorite categories. Obviously, a big part of this podcast is exactly that: stories and tactics. Maybe I should have called it that instead. Actually, language learning, stories and tactics. Anyway, um, one big topic that I feel like we do need to talk about is the name of the conference, and sort of the I guess the yeah, I don't know what to call it actually. The name is Women in Language. The speakers are all female, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
So I guess a lot of people listening to this, and I might have been like this as well when I heard about it first time, is why do we need that kind of focus on the women in languages? Like the polyglot events, they're not, as far as I know anyway, not particularly segregated. They're not. There's not a huge bias towards the male participants. So how did you decide to start that kind of process? And do you want to talk about kind of the aims you have with this?
So we wanted to create this event to give women in language the opportunity to speak, to champion and amplify their voices. Um, at some of the language events, it's not like there still aren't as many female speakers as male speakers. I know that that's improving, but we just wanted to provide a place where women could kind of get the spotlight, where if there's a panel, it's not 5 men and 1 woman. And we just wanted to provide a place where women in language could get the spotlight, and where they could be featured and they could share their experiences and their methods and their research. And the title Women in Language only refers to the speakers. So we have all female speakers, but the event is open to anyone of any gender. Men, women, non-binary are more than welcome to attend the event. It's just that our lineup of speakers are women.
We'll just take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. On this podcast, I've interviewed hundreds of language learners, some of the world's greatest polyglots and industry experts. And one thing they all agree on is the value of one-to-one tutoring lessons. And for this, I highly recommend italki. They have thousands of teachers in all price ranges, and they even have certified teachers who have taken diplomas or have degrees in the language you're learning. So whether you're just brushing up on your Italian ahead of a trip to Rome, or you want to master Russian to take the exam, or whatever your goals are in languages, italki has a tutor suitable for you. And compared to private tutoring offline, it's really affordable. You can find informal tutors down to $5 an hour, and you can have trial lessons for even less. So if you want to master a language from the comfort of your own home, and you even get a $10 credit when you complete your first lesson, go to languageteacher.co and check out italki. It might be the best thing you do for your language learning this year. Right. Understand. But do you think that, or can you imagine that some males out there will be thinking like, oh wow, I'm being kind of excluded from this, so they want me to come and pay the ticket and watch the show, but I can't present there. So what would you say to people like that who are a little bit maybe put off by that kind of setup?
I understand that some people are going to be put off by that, but that's not who we're trying to support in this. I mean, obviously we support anyone in languages, but with this particular event, we're looking to have strictly female speakers. And, if someone has an issue with the fact that it's an all-female speaker, that might be an issue, not necessarily with us, but, on the other side,
Of course.
if we want to support women in language, and historically in a variety of industries, women haven't had as much opportunity as men, and so we're just trying to create a little bit more opportunity.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I just know that people are going to be sitting out there thinking, "Women in language? That's a special name, for an online language conference. It's not a gendered activity in any way." So,
Mm-hmm.
so I just want to address it there, and I think for me personally, also just to give my 2 cents, for the first one, I wasn't really that supportive because I was like, "Well, why do we need this?" But what I realized is that it doesn't really matter what I think, because first of all, I'm not, the speaking engagement is not made for me. The language learning information and knowledge that's being shared, everyone can use, first of all. But I think for me, the most important thing was simply, if 3 of my friends want to do this and think that there's a need for it and there's a place for it, and all these wonderful speakers, like I read some of the bios of people I would have never heard of if this event hadn't been made, and I've even talked to some of them on the podcast this season because of women in languages. I'm like all for it, fantastic,
See,
and
that's exactly why we do it.
yeah, exactly. So I think that I can definitely relate if people are maybe sipping their coffee and thinking, what, why? But the fact that people want to see it, like speakers want to speak at it, you guys want to take the time to actually set it up, host it, market it, that's a big job, even if you split it among 3 people, and people want to come and see it, then how dare anyone say, well, that's a bad idea. It doesn't matter what the setup is, but if so many people want it and so many people want to spend the time on it, it must be valuable. So that's kind of how I went from the last year, and I'm happy that you continue with it, and we're looking forward to see the interesting talks this year, and I'll be definitely checking out the participants list and get some new podcast invitations sent off to talk to a lot more interesting people as well this season.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's a fantastic. And are you going to be doing any talks there, or are you just going to do the hosting?
So Lindsay, Kirsten, and I don't talk at the main events. We do other smaller events like the Women in Language Camp, where we do speak. We did one this past October, but really we want to kind of take ourselves out of the spotlight and give other people the chance to, kind of discuss their work and what they're doing. And then also by doing that, we open up the opportunity to discuss things that may not get discussed at other events. So, a lot of talks surrounding language involve, language and travel specifically, like, the digital nomad thing.
Mm,
And while that totally makes sense because, when you speak other languages, you have more opportunities in travel. Even I do, by speaking other languages, I get to do more things with music because I know those languages. But we want to talk about some of the other things involved in languages, like how you still find the time when you have a family, when you have kids, and you have other obligations and responsibilities. How to learn languages around a full-time job, or what things you can do in language beyond learning languages to travel. Like, what else does this skill offer you? So that's one of the other things that we're aiming to do with this event, is to kind of highlight some of the topics that don't normally get brought up and create a place where it's, I suppose, safe to talk about them.
right. Yeah, I guess the one downside to having all these conferences around the world that kind of move around is that the people who get to go and speak to a lot of them and or participate in many of them often, you are looking at a very big portion of them being in their 20 to 20 to 30, maybe 20 to 35, without like a huge obligation or anything. Maybe they are location independent, working online or something. And I guess that kind of group is not, it's a nice kind of aspiration if you want to travel more and if you want to have more flexibility and freedom. But for most people it's just not realistic. For most people it'll be, how do I fit in a couple of hours of language learning a week when I have to take care of the kids and the family and the job. Basically, a lot of people have that 9 to 5 where maybe they have a commute of 1 hour each way. They have to, keep the house clean and do all the chores, and it's hard to translate from that kind of digital nomad young person, no commitments, into this established family member who gets, I don't know, a couple of weeks of holiday a year, and kind of have that advice work. It's good to have both perspectives for sure, but I know what you mean when you see it at the conferences. There's a lot of, I would say, they're kind of unrealistic expectations, or at least presentations. They're great people, they're really amazing language learners, but they're outliers. That is a big problem at the conferences. Maybe not so much the gathering, because everyone can present, and I think that gives a kind of a balance where you get a little bit more down to earth stories. But in some of the conferences where they cherry pick the presenters, some of the things are just almost ridiculous. Like, oh, I traveled Asia for 6 months and learned these 3 languages. It's like 99% of people are not able to do that.
Well, I mean, it's really inspiring to hear stories like that. So I understand the appeal. Plus, it's sexy. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that, the questions and the needs of, other people are being met as well. So it's just, with Women in Language, we just want to create more diversity in speakers, more diversity in the topics that are brought up in this environment. And then, it's just, again, like, there's places for both. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
yeah.
I love those stories. Don't get me wrong, but it's hard to relate to. Even for me, I'm location independent and can definitely travel a lot. But some of these people have done amazing things, and it's very inspirational. I love to hear the stories, but I can imagine a lot of people are thinking that's really far from my kind of reality. So if you have a better mix, or a chance to show or talk about other topics that affect more people, then I think that's also a great idea.
Yeah.
What kind of other topics do you think that, well, I don't know, it could be topics that are on the Women in Language conference as well, but what other topics do you feel like in language learning, maybe comparing it to the events that are kind of underrepresented, if any?
Um, I think we talk a lot about how to help your children learn more languages, but we don't necessarily talk about how you, as a parent, can find time to learn languages, or things that you can do as a family, like getting your kids involved in the language that you're learning as a way for you to continue your studies and also kind of get them interested. We don't talk about there's just a variety of things that I think, the focus is often like really either like academic, or we talk a lot about how to learn specific languages or language learning techniques. But maybe things like, for example, we have Jordan Akins, who's talking about how to her talk is practicing languages in the medical sector. So basically, like how she's using languages in a specific industry. So more talks like that, as opposed to like just here's how to learn a language, or here's like an introduction to French, or here's how I've used 30 languages to travel the world, kind of like you were saying, sort of thing. And again, while those talks are really inspiring and they're really motivating to hear, and it's amazing to see what people can do with languages, sometimes someone's not maybe trying to figure out how to learn their 15th language. They're just trying to figure out how to fit French into their lives so that they can better communicate with, a group of friends that they have, or their in-laws, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I definitely see that a lot, where the talk a lot about methods and strategies. And I think the biggest thing I've realized after all these interviews, after all these years of kind of, let's call it amateur research into polyglots, is that the way you do things are not quite as important as your entire kind of mindset and the mental side of things. So for instance, I wouldn't say it's very important what method you choose, as long as you choose a method that works for you. There's no one method that's better than the other. But if you can somehow teach people how to, let's say, build a weekly schedule into their busy lives that allows you to learn languages on a regular basis, that is much more powerful than, oh, here's a new way to use Anki or something.
Well, again, I think it depends on the person. I mean, there may be people who need a talk on how to better improve their use of Anki, whereas there's people who don't need that. So, again, just having more variation in the kinds of talks that are out there and the kinds of people who are presenting those talks, you're going to help people who may not be helped by one, and then the other people are going to be covered by the other one. So just by the nature of having this diversity, of having this availability, and that's the great thing about being online, is that is accessibility. So there's a place for everything, and people are going to benefit from these different kinds of talks, but just by creating an environment where both kinds can happen.
Yeah. And that's the great thing about language events in general, also the online event, is that if you see a talk that doesn't interest you, well, you can just skip it, or you go have a coffee instead, or there's even if multiple topics interest you at the same time, you can always go back and watch the recording so you don't miss anything. Luckily, most of the in-person conferences are also recorded. Obviously, it takes quite a while for them to edit everything, and the audio is not great, and so in that sense, an online event is much better. But I like the idea that I look at a kind of a schedule of speakers, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting for me, this is interesting for me, and go for those. Like I wouldn't be interested in how to teach your kid a language, not yet anyway. It might come later in a few years' time, but for now, it's not relevant to me. Whereas somebody might be like dying to find out more about that, which is a very difficult topic, and yeah.
That's true, but even if you're not interested in it, going to a talk like that, you may learn about techniques for time management, or resources, or techniques for learning alongside someone else, or techniques for teaching someone else that you might not have picked up in a different kind of talk.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely true. So you would say, let's say if you're attending Women in Language or another conference, it doesn't matter which one, you would suggest that people watch or kind of follow along, because you don't know necessarily what you can learn based on the title and description. So just kind of diving in, and you might learn things you never even expected.
Exactly. We can go back to the introversion thing as an example. So I'm an introvert, I'm shy, and I talk about this a lot and how it relates to language learning and the things that I do as an introverted, shy language learner. And someone who's extroverted might think, oh, I'm extroverted, this doesn't apply to me. But I've had tons of extroverts attend my talks and tell me that they've walked away with a lot of techniques that they can use to improve their language learning experiences. So it's just a little bit of open-mindedness. You may not think, okay, that's not for me, but I would still recommend trying. It can still not be for you. That's okay. It doesn't have to be for you. But just because on a surface level, on paper, it doesn't look like it's for you, doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually the case.
Right. Well, that's a totally fair point, and I definitely admit to being a little bit close-minded sometimes with when it comes to talks, especially at the live conferences. But I think that's different because that there I kind of prioritize talking to friends and people in the hall who I haven't seen in a while. So I'm a little bit more strict with what I attend. But you're right, I probably would get a lot out of attending a talk every time I had the opportunity.
But you can just challenge yourself to attend like maybe one talk that would maybe be outside of your comfort zone or something that you wouldn't normally attend. It's just a good personal experiment, I think.
Right. That sounds like fun. I imagine like a badge or something, the one talk challenge or something, where every day you pick out something that you would never have gone to, but you go anyway and see where that takes you.
That sounds like a really fun idea.
We'll have to set that up for the next conference. But Shannon, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your experience with hosting your own conference. I mean, it must have been a lot of work as well between you. So thank you for putting on the show and everything you do with the Ad One and now drops your little software project as well as won numerous awards. I saw it in the App Store and there's like accolades everywhere, trophies everywhere. So congrats on that, the work you do with that.
Thank you.
Maybe actually just before we finish, maybe that's a good little side note to put in there. So how did you get involved with an app like Drops?
Um, Good question. I got involved because I actually started using Drops like right when they started, when they only had, I believe, 4 languages. It was around the time that I was working on my like kind of quick Italian refresh project for Fluent in 3 months. And I just love the app. I love that it limited me to 5 minutes, that I, was really working to maximize that 5 minutes. So I kind of ranted and raved about it. And because of that, they got in touch with me. And it eventually evolved into working with them. So I feel really lucky to be able to work with them. We were selected as Google's App of the Year, not for language learning, but for all of the apps that are available in the Google Play Store.
It's
We
crazy.
were featured as App of the Day for Apple. We were just mentioned as one of the top 10 most innovative companies by Fast Company. So it's amazing. And the team is amazing. And I love working on Drops and being involved in that. And so, yeah.
What do you think the big kind of differentiating factor is between Drops and similar? Because it's a flashcard concept where you get the what do you call it, you don't forget the forgetting curve. You use that principle. But what do you think separates Drops? I think first of all, it's a beautiful app for me. But are there any other things that separate it from, let's say, maybe not Duolingo, but something like Memrise or the flashcard apps like Anki, or there's like hundreds of them.
So the first is that we're not actually a flashcard app. We are a vocabulary learning app, and we just focus on that one thing. We only teach vocabulary. So we don't try to do everything. We don't try to tackle grammar. We don't try to tackle anything like that. We're just a vocabulary app. And we have thousands of words. We have word lists that are really well curated, and for topics that are often difficult to find, like for example, when I was learning Chinese, I couldn't find Chinese vocabulary related to children, like having kids, having a baby at all, and Drops
Mm,
was the first place where I saw that. um, And then there's just like other really highly specialized lists. There's just tons of words that you can learn. We work with professional translators. We have professional voice talents. It's beautifully designed. So as you're using drops, it's immersive and there's no typing. So everything's really intuitive. It's just swiping and tapping. Also, it's actually a game. So most of the other language apps, they're language learning apps that are gamified. So there's game elements to them, whereas ours is actually the reverse. So it's first a game that teaches you a language. So our focus is on that gameplay and is on the, having fun and, the 5-minute limit as well. Again, it's not a big commitment, so it's easy to do. It's fun. You actually feel like you need to make the most of the time that you have with it. And so I just think that there's a lot of different things that separate it. So.
Yeah. And obviously you talked a lot about the technical stuff, but I just want to emphasize just how nice it is. It's a really pretty app. It's really well designed, and the animations that it brings up it's like, yeah, it just brings a little bit of happiness to your learning. I think the way it kind of goes.
It makes your language learning beautiful.
And beautiful and fun. Yeah, that should be like the tagline of the app. Fantastic. Well, now it's definitely we can end the show here, and yeah, thank you so much for sharing your passion as always, and I hope that people go and check out Women in Language. So what's where do they go to find out more? And it's really soon, so if you're listening to this, go and get your ticket now, because it's very soon. It's March. When was it?
It's March 7th to March 10th, and you can buy tickets up until the last day of the event. So because you're able to watch the recordings. So you can buy tickets up until March 10th, and you can get them at womeninlanguage.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I really appreciate having you here today. Just before you leave, I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is italki. italki is a tutoring platform where you can find affordable tutors for every language in the world, pretty much. So get started today and get a free $10 credit when you book your first lesson. If you go to actualfluency.com/italki, and that's spelled ITALKI. So give it a go and feel how tutoring can really boost and enhance your language learning.